Hi, this is Professor Unrack, and I'm here to talk to you about one type of voting system of three types of voting systems that I'm asking you to learn about in addition to the work you'll be doing in the assigned chapter in your textbook for this week. The type of system that we use for most offices in the United States is called first past the post or winner take all. It's sometimes referred to also as single member districts, and so I want to take a few minutes to talk about how that kind of voting system works and what some of the advantages and disadvantages are to having that kind of system. There's nothing in the US Constitution that says we have to have one type of voting system or another, and maybe someday we'll change to a different voting system. Maine, for example, uses ranked choice voting for some of its offices, which is one of the other systems that you're going to be learning about. And lots of countries, other than the United States, use a system called proportional representation, which has its advantages and disadvantages as well. So this short video talks about first past the post or winner take all systems. So in a first past the post system, the country or the state are divided into geographic areas called, in the United States, we call them districts. In some countries, they call them something else. So for example, in Canada, which also has first past the post for a lot of its offices, they call them ridings instead of districts, but we call them districts. And everybody lives in a bunch of districts. So your house is located in a bunch of different districts. It's located in a district for the House of Representatives. It's located in a district for the California State Assembly. It's located in a district for the California State Senate. So wherever you live, you are represented by lots of people who get elected to their office in what we call single member districts. This map shows you what the congressional districts look like, the lines, the geographic boundary lines look like for the House of Representatives. And you can see that some states have a few districts, Colorado. Some states have only one district because they only have one seat in the House of Representatives. California has 53 seats in the House of Representatives, and each of these represents a different district. I'm sitting right now in this district. A lot of you live in this district, but this is the district map for the whole country. So in single member districts, first past the post types of elections, voters can choose only one person to represent that geographic area in that particular legislative body, whether it's the House of Representatives or the California Assembly or the Sacramento County Board of Supervisors, or even the Los Rios Community College Board of Directors. They also are elected in single member districts. In this type of system, the candidate who gets the most votes wins. When there are only two candidates running, say a Democrat and a Republican, then the person who wins will get 50% or more of the vote. If there are more than two candidates running, say there's a Republican, a Democrat, and a Green Party candidate running, then a candidate can win the office without getting 50% of the vote. And I'll talk about that as one of the disadvantages of this system in just a minute. So the advantages of first past the post systems. You don't hear a lot about the advantages of first past the post systems. I looked for a video instead of making this pathetic video. I actually looked for a video that would accurately explain first past the post systems without being overly critical of them. Most of the videos out there are pretty critical of single member district first past the post systems. So that's one of the reasons I'm making this video instead of just linking to a video on our Canvas website. So one of the first advantages of first past the post systems, they're easy. It's easy to vote. There's usually a relatively small number of candidates running. You get to vote for one and you're done, right? You don't have to rank all of the candidates in the order that you would prefer that they get elected. You don't have to choose 4 out of 7. You just vote for one person and then you're done voting for that office. It makes it very easy to count the vote. You count up the number of votes people get, and the person who gets the most votes wins. Other systems are somewhat more complicated. not necessarily worse, but more complicated. So one of the advantages of first past the post systems is it's relatively easy. They're easy to administer. You just count the vote once. You don't have to then go back and do some sort of weird mathematical calculation. It's just the person who gets the most votes wins. It works very well in a two-party system. If there are two major political parties that represent the political ideology of most of the people living in that country or living in that state, single member first past the post systems work very well because generally speaking, one political party will probably control the government, which we assume means that that party reflects the wishes of the majority of the people. And then in the next election, if the people decide they don't want that party to be in charge, they can vote for the other party to be in charge. This is a little bit more complicated in the United States because we have separation of powers. But in countries that are like a parliament, for example, single member districts almost always ensure that you're going to have one party that is obviously in charge of running the government for whatever period of time it is until the next election. Now, if you're the party in power, this sounds like a really good thing. If you're the party that's not in power, it might not sound like such a good thing. But it does make it more likely that the government will be able to get policies passed. Right? If there's one party controlling the government, it's much easier to get things done. This can be especially important in times of crisis or in times of war when you need to be able to act quickly. Some people like the fact that a first past the post system also tends to lead to moderate policy outcomes. So if you have more than two political parties sharing power, right? So there's people representing 3 parties in the legislature or people representing 4 parties in the legislature, the outcome might be that more liberal policies get enacted or more conservative policies get enacted. In a two-party system, which most first past the post systems are generally two-party systems, the policy outcomes tend to be relatively moderate. Things don't change super aggressively in one direction or another for the most part. That's not true in every single policy issue. It's not true all the time. But generally speaking, things tend to change relatively slowly. And for people who like a more moderate pace to the political process, single member districts are more likely to give you that. The disadvantages of first past the post systems, there are lots of them. I'm just going to highlight 4. I don't want to overload you with information, but if you have an interest, you could certainly look up more information. One of the videos that I've assigned for you to watch is very critical of single member districts. It's a really well done video and it's only about 6 minutes long. So you can learn about some of the other disadvantages of first past the post systems. First past the post single member districts, one of the disadvantages is that a person can win without getting more than 50% of the vote. And this happens if there are more than 2 political parties running candidates for the office. I'll show you a graph that illustrates this in a second. It sort of ties in with the second disadvantage of first past the post systems, which is that they discourage the development of third parties, because in order to win, you have to get the most votes. And third parties almost always they don't represent really large numbers of people, or I should say they don't represent enough of the population to get the most votes in any given election. So I'll show you how that might work. So I have 3 political parties here: the Cat Party, the Dog Party, and the Hamster Party. And these are 4 single member districts, and each party is running a candidate in each of these districts. And the way I've set it up, the Cat Party gets the most votes in 2 of the districts, and the Dog Party gets the most votes in the other 2 districts. The Hamster Party gets 25% of the vote in each of the districts. And so the outcome of this election is going to be that the Cat Party has 2 seats in the legislature, and the Dog Party has 2 seats in the legislature, and the poor Hamster Party doesn't have any seats in the legislature at all, even though they got a pretty respectable 25% of the vote in each district. So you can see that for third parties, single member districts are really frustrating because it's really hard for them to ever win outright to get a seat at the table in the legislative body. And it makes it very easy for the other two political parties to ignore the things that they want. The other thing that this slide illustrates is that both the cat party candidates and the dog party candidates won their seats, but none of them in this illustration got 50% of the vote. And in fact, if you add the votes together of the candidates who lost, they're way more collectively than the number of votes that the person who won got. So in this district, for example, the dog party and the hamster party represented collectively 55% of the people. So 55% of the people who voted didn't want the cat person to win, but the cat person won anyway. So that's one of those are two of the big disadvantages of first past the post systems. Because they tend to lead to a two-party system and discourage the formation of third parties, that means that minority ideas and minority voices can be shut out of the process. So for example, if a group of people is super, super, super progressive or super, super, super conservative, it's less likely in a single member district system that those ideas are going to become part of the political mainstream and have a chance of getting enacted into law. And that's just one of the disadvantages of first past the post systems. On the one hand, the policies tend to be moderate. Things don't change radically from one year to the next. You can be pretty confident that the laws you're living under today will pretty much be the laws you're living under for the foreseeable future with some tweaks. But it also means that minority voices can feel shut out of the process. And that can be very frustrating for people who don't belong to or don't feel comfortable in one of the two major parties. The last disadvantage of first past the post systems that I'll talk about is that it's subject to gerrymandering. We've talked about gerrymandering in other parts of the class, the drawing of district boundary lines to favor one party or another. Single member districts are really subjected to that because only one person can win. In other types of systems, the other two that I'm going to ask you to learn about this week, gerrymandering might be less of a problem. It might be a little bit of a problem, but it's maybe less of a problem. So if you're concerned about gerrymandering and the impact of drawing district boundary lines to favor one political party or another, you can't really avoid that in a single member district unless you set up a citizen commission, for example, to draw the district boundary lines and specifically prohibit them from gerrymandering. Most states don't use that kind of system in the United States, so we have a lot of gerrymandering in the United States as a result. So that's my little discussion about first past the post, winner take all systems, some of their advantages and some of their disadvantages.